Hey, everybody. I'd like to welcome Sana Karapaloti, right?
Carpalati.
Carpalati. I was so
Good.
close.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's a transformational healer and she uses energy psychology. And I'd like to welcome her to the podcast. And Sana, what we do here on the podcast is pretty straightforward, which we discuss how the outer circumstances of our lives will stimulate our inner environment in two very distinct ways. And one of those is through what I call the psychological ego after Freud. And the other is through the divine soul connection that we all have to all that is. So, why do I think it's important to know the difference? Well, that's where people like you come in, our guests, to help us relate to this inner conflict within ourselves and bring it together and integrate it into one full, beautiful, very messy human experience. So, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and please finish introducing yourself.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here and to talk about these subjects that I really haven't put many words to since graduate school
Yeah.
or I don't know, catechism class maybe. But so I help people who have experienced stress and anxiety uh, for a long time, and they've tried lots of different things. Uh, Sometimes they have a list about this long of different things that they've tried, and uh, they haven't been able to get the relief that they want. So what I do in my work is I'm really good at taking what is presented
Mm,
and tracking it back to either early life trauma, which could be pregnancy, birth,
mm,
that first year or so, or ancestral trauma. Because I grabbed this. So like, this is my life team. This is me
oh,
some years ago. These are my parents, grandparents, and then these are Google images. I hope
oh,
they're not
wow.
influencing too much, but um, so anyway, things that happen back here,
Yes.
move. I refer to it as a bleed down through the system. And there's actually, physiology that has been discovered in recent years that is contained in the sperm and the ovaries that
Mm,
can become a part of my system through epigenetic transfer. So, and
yes.
that methylation process. So I take a look at this, and I also do genograms. I don't
Mm,
know if you're familiar with those.
yeah. Yeah. We did those
Yeah,
in graduate school. I remember that.
right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
my work isn't like therapy. I did therapy for about eight
Mhm.
years and mostly with kids and then a little bit with adults. And uh, I was in therapy myself and I couldn't get better. Uh,
Mm,
and I didn't understand why. Uh,
mhm,
and what I realized was that I'd never gone inward and taken a
mhm,
look at how I was programmed and how my scroll of traumas had impacted me and how that energy and that conflict was living in my system, in my cells.
yeah.
So I remember one day I was standing in my apartment and my dad had died. My mom died when I was a child very suddenly, and then my dad died. I was 28.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was just standing there crying. And I said, I'm going to figure out and find a way to help people quickly. So it took a couple of years, and I stumbled into alchemical hypnotherapy, which literally changed my life and explained why and helped me connect with and become aware of why I never cried at my mother's death. Uh,
Wow.
and that was because uh, I did. I didn't have. I didn't have any. I didn't have any like resource or support to go to because
Mhm,
there was my intuition and I was having dreams and all this stuff happening that I thought she was going to die. And
Wow.
then she passed right in front of me. She had a brain aneurysm,
Oh
and
my
I
God.
literally thought I killed her, that I
Oh,
had
wow.
some hand. And, back in the day, um, there was, I didn't know the word intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about, I just thought that in my childlike way, that I distorted that information, and so I suppressed, and I had a very strong ego like this for about
Mm-hmm.
20 years. But as one of the trauma symptoms is, you don't ask, I don't tell. So
Uh,
of course I never put words to it either until that alchemical hypnotherapy experience, that where I was able to I went inward for the first time, other
wow.
than the cursing that I was doing in my
Yeah.
body, and those demeaning thoughts. Um, and I was able to have an incredible conversation with her. And I started crying, telling her that I'm sorry that I contributed to her death. And she, like, it was, I could feel this unconditional love. And she said, "No, Sana, that was between me and God."
Wow.
And and that literally changed my life,
I
because
bet.
I felt like a shedding, like a release of, just
Wow.
an incredible burden that I didn't realize, and how much it had impacted my life. I was sick in my 20s. uh, I mean, there was so much stuff that went on during childhood and that time period. And that started, and my foray into this field. And uh, interestingly enough, like the next week, I'll talk about synchronicity, although I didn't know that word that much back then in the early 90s. She was doing this year-long training in the alchemical work, and I said, I'm in, so that was my
Mm.
foray into taking this broader, deeper look into um, uh, my clients' lives as well as my own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're a perfect example of why I want to do the podcast, right? Is you were a therapist, you have all the clinical tools. And you couldn't figure out what is the deeper thing that I need to do, but it's not available in our sessions. It's not something we're taught in graduate school. We have to go to these extraordinary circumstances to find tools that therapists can complement for sure, right? Like we can help process and talk through it, but we do need to address and meet people like you and feel comfortable, referring to you and to talking to people like you, because there's a deeper level that is not verbal sometimes, that there's just nothing you
Right.
can say about the fact that not only did your mother die in front of you, which is, trauma itself, but then to have known that you took all of this on as somehow your fault, and probably was not even able to verbalize that as a kid,
No,
and
I
probably
never did.
couldn't yeah, probably couldn't verbalize it well to a therapist, or if you did, you're like, well, just saying it doesn't change anything, it's still
Right.
there.
Well,
And yeah.
yeah, so the interesting thing, uh, I thought this was an eye opener for me, because I was working as the primary therapist on this children's unit. It was a crisis stabilization unit. I
Mm,
was about 27 at that time. And I, several weeks into it, I found myself crying a lot, right?
wow.
And I'm thinking, oh my, I'm so compassionate. But then about 3 weeks later, I'm thinking, I think there's a problem here. So I go and see my senior therapist, Dr. Fast, and he was really hot too. But so he asked me, like, did you have any trauma? And I said, no. And I was
You
like,
said
oh my
no.
God, no. I said, no. And my dad
Wow.
had severe PTSD from war wounds. And uh,
Wow.
so I mean, there were a bunch of other things too, but that's what that's that consciousness that and that tension that we grew up
Mm,
with. And
yeah.
uh, uh, I realized that at that point that if I'm going to work in this field, I need to do my personal work
Mm-hmm.
because I literally, in some way, sit in front of myself every day.
For sure.
In some way,
For sure.
I've either been there or have experienced somebody who's had that experience, or I've done it myself. Uh,
Yeah.
so that was a really big turning point when I realized that I needed to be a part of I needed to be engaged in my own processing if I'm going to sit in front of people, because I think that's an honor
Mm-hmm. I agree.
when people come here and entrust me in the
Mm-hmm.
way that they do, and I need to be as open as possible.
Yeah. And so in the term of the, the clinical term ego,
Hmm.
I mean, clearly you would have probably developed one rather young, experiencing that all that trauma and then had defense mechanisms. I know you smiled really big, like, and I don't show anybody, right? So your ego not only
Yeah,
is horrified by thinking, oh, I did this or could do this, but then you have this defense mechanism of, but I'm not going to show anybody this, and I'm going to smile big, and I'm going to, like, is that how you would define your ego? It sounded like that's maybe
right.
how
Well,
you saw yourself.
yeah, the way I see it now, of course, I didn't know at the time because
Right,
I had no words
right,
to talk about that kind of
right.
stuff. I, so I just went like this.
Just big smile, just
Right, because I
yeah.
figured, and I don't even know that I figured this out. It was because there were 6 kids in my family,
Oh,
and
wow.
and my little brother was 10 days old when
Oh
she
my gosh.
I know, it was, so we became the family whose mother died, but there was nowhere to go with her. Her name was never mentioned again.
You're kidding.
Yeah. So the Catholic bishop tried to put us in an orphanage like 2 weeks later. I
Oh
mean,
my god.
there was like layers and layers of trauma around. So, like her actual death is here. So there was all these layers of stuff that
Wow.
there was, and the fact and my own beliefs about. And I had a beautiful experience with her. I mean, but. Um, I kind of went off on a little tangent. What was your question? Oh, my ego. So,
Yeah.
so we all 6 of us found I always described it as we went off into our corners and came out defended.
Mm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So for me, uh, it was definitely that persona of I'm good, you know,
Yeah. Mm.
and but if somebody would have flicked at me, I would have shattered.
Wow. Well, it sounds
Yeah.
like you came across a bunch of other egos, right, that were freaking out and trying to protect you or move you quickly or do things, not saying your mom's name, and I think the collective egos that were around also influence the way that we develop our own ego, obviously, in
Right,
response to
right,
this. Yeah.
right. Well, and
So,
I again, the nuns would were telling my dad, "Oh, don't worry, kids don't grieve," and
wow.
so where else could I go? I mean,
Yeah.
so I had developed this identity, and my view, what I presented to the world and what was going on in here was kind of frozen. And
Wow.
uh, so there was a lot of resistance to,
Mm.
uh, I don't know, to life in general, but I socialized a lot because that helped me to balance out the like my fragmented experience at home. I
Yeah.
was looking for a lot of connection out here in the world. So that
Yeah.
became kind of, kind of my, so when somebody comes in and I can, because like if I were to walk into my office, and start watching, uh, I would be looking at posturing and, facial expressions and how I use language and what choices of words and where my body is constricting while I talk or,
Mhm, mhm.
um, so when I read that, that helps me to kind of get a feel for what the gap is between what I present and also what's going on internally. But
Yeah.
there's, I really think that ego is so necessary. But I mean, I was laughing with myself as I was thinking about this because I remember, when I used to hang around with all these groups of friends and we'd refer to somebody as an egomaniac,
Uh-huh.
because they were arrogant or
Mhm.
they, were full of themselves in some way. But I, I don't think well, I certainly didn't realize how necessary the ego is, and also that it's flexible and it can change, but it's
Yeah.
really like depending on the gap and how it's presented. I mean, it can be, and it is an expression, I think, of wounding, and but the
Mhm.
goal is to integrate and empower it in a way that it's in harmony, with our higher self.
Yeah, well said. An expression of wounding, but that we can
Yeah.
integrate with our higher self. And had you not had that wounding, you probably would not have had that, that moment when you're working and you're like, okay, I need to actually heal this thing in me. It's not compassion, it's terror and wounding and the scared person in me. And then you went to something you said called hypno alchemy.
Yeah, alchemy work, which is basically
Yeah.
turning your lead into gold. That was my first experience of seeing that I'm the container,
Yes.
and I'm expressing that in my life because
Yes.
when I made that connection, I f- it was like everything softened for me. I
Mm.
felt like a part of me was like my soul, maybe, I guess, was
Yeah.
starting to kind of come forward. I was able to set more boundaries, um, take direct action in my career, or in relationships, and allow it kind of. I navigated the world very differently as soon as
Yeah.
my like if I saw my, well, I would see it more out here just because of that
Yeah.
expression. But the more it came inward towards me, and it changed how I navigated the world because it enabled me um, to establish myself as an individual in the pool of the
Yeah.
quantum field, so to speak.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you had this amazing spiritual moment of feeling your
Oh,
mother's unconditional love and forgiveness, and then feeling your soul come forward. And I would agree with you. Once I started what I call soul organizing, I love being a human now. Like it's so there's a lot less effort. I mean, there's a lot less drama. There's a lot less like, you know, just beating myself up. It's like if there's no point, so
right, right.
that's why I want to help other people sort of merge these two perspectives in the way that you're talking about. And it sounds like it totally reinformed the way you work with clients. It sounds like once you felt that level of soul based healing, you're like, okay, I'm all in, and now I can really direct my energy work or
Right.
psychology work. Yeah, how did that
Well,
change the way
that
you
wasn't
work with
really,
people?
yeah, that wasn't really known back then because that term wasn't coined until like '07.
Mhm,
But,
mhm.
uh, you know, I started doing that work, which was, I don't know, I consider it to be energy psychology because there
Yeah,
is like a spiritual, energetic component to it. Because
yeah.
and so EFT came out, emotional
Mhm.
freedom technique, the tapping. So I started that training with Gary Craig in '05.
Okay.
Okay. And of course, back in the day, it was like, what the heck is this? Uh, because I wasn't accustomed to touching the body
Yeah.
in any way, but it enabled me to enter into the aspects of self through any possible vehicle, because sometimes
Mm,
clients don't have words. So we can go in through the
right.
body or in
Mm,
through the heart or energy of some sort. So,
yep.
um, yeah, so in my work, when I when somebody comes in, because I'm very whole, I have a holistic orientation myself. I live that way and have
Hmm.
for a long time. Um, so in terms of like health and like surgery recovery, like food issues, illnesses, I think the ego plays a crucial role in that
Yep.
like what is their experience with what is going to happen or what has happened, um, how do they respond to stress in general and also now to this stress, and also can they engage in healing, can
Mm,
they move through that, whatever healing means for them, because that, like, my role I think is to look at what those obstructions are so that they can come to some sense of peace and empowerment and also self trust in the healing process,
yeah.
whether they're going to surgery or just got a new diagnosis or trauma or something. So,
Yeah. Yeah, one
um,
of the things that you talked about, which, I said would be so fun because I've never talked to anyone about it before, is working with people with food addiction, right? Or sugar addiction. And how did that come as to be part of your practice?
okay. Well, so I, when I started doing the emotional freedom technique in '05, I was sitting there with myself and tapping and
Me, myself,
learning,
and I.
yes, and kind of learning some things. And I realized, because my first client was in Atlanta, I live in Pittsburgh.
Hmm.
And so we were on the phone at that point, and I said, "Look, just humor me. I'm going to send you these instructions, these tapping points, and we're going to do this, okay?" Because I felt pretty okay with knowing. So she calls me up at 10 o'clock, and she's in the middle of a full blown panic attack.
Okay.
And I said, "Okay, let's just do this."
Yeah.
So we did several rounds of tapping. It was a 10, 0 to 10 on the SUD scale. And I said, "Okay, when you're ready, tell me what's going on." So I'm sitting there, time's passing, and pretty soon it's like I'm not hearing anything. And I thought, I didn't know what I was waiting for her of like two
Uh-huh.
minutes, and she finally says, "Where did it go?" It was gone.
What? Oh, the
The panic
anxiety.
attack. The panic
Oh,
attack.
wow.
And so then we were able to do the work. So that kind of told me that I needed to add that to my repertoire.
Mm,
So anyway, I'm learning that, right? I'm
yeah.
still kind of in the process. And I thought, I wonder if I can do this with food, right?
Mm,
So I had a pretty bad sugar addiction for a lot of years, and it impacted my health, my brain, everything. Um, it made me a very cranky person. And so I thought, and I had, I had in particular an addiction to chocolate chip cookies.
mm,
Like I couldn't eat just one. I had
mhm,
to have like 10, 12. And then
mhm.
I would literally, like you could see it in my face. The next day, my eyes would be swollen. And um, so I said, wonder if I could help myself with this. So anyway, I go get a cookie. I got a couple cookies. I actually made cookies and I brought them into my office and I started, just having them sit there. I wanted the cookie. I mean, I had to eat it. So I said, okay, I'm going to tap on that experience. So I brought that
Oh,
down. And then all of a sudden, I started crying. I mean,
wow.
huge tears because back in the day, my mom, my two sisters, and me, we would bake chocolate, Toll House chocolate chip cookies
Uh,
like a lot. And it
yeah.
was so much fun. You know how you pick out the one with the best chip position and everything. And when she died, obviously that was gone. But my brother, he used to say, like, I started baking a lot of cookies. Like every weekend, I was baking cookies. He says, "Why
Yeah.
do you have to, bake so many goddamn cookies?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, but I have to." So that came up. And what I realized is that I was trying to bring back that feeling of
Mm-hmm.
joy and love and connection that we had. But so I continued tapping through that and so forth. And the conclusion or the solution for me was that uh, I can bake the cookies or have one, but first I take in a memory
Oh, interesting.
and I allow it to expand within myself. And I put my hands on my heart and I feel the love and that connection. And then I scout out where the chips are positioned and pick the one that I want and I savor it.
Wow. Wow.
So
And
I
so
guess the,
you've been able to transfer this to your clients with other
oh, yeah,
like
yeah. I've done I do a lot of soda, like diet or whatever, pop, however you refer to it. Um, like I don't addiction. I have there's a success story on my website about a woman. She drank quite a few. Uh, well, yeah, probably like 6 or 8 diet sodas a day.
wow.
She said, I want to stop. So we did the tapping on it, and she hasn't had one since. Uh,
Wow. In one session.
yes,
Wow. And
yes.
and I know that EFT is something people could learn on their own, but I'm sure there's something about you being in the room or you working with the person that complements it in a way that maybe is really unique to you. Is there something very unique that you could express about you working with the client?
Um, it's very intuitive.
Mhm.
I know
Mhm.
that word now.
Yeah.
So um, I don't follow a script, but I can read what's because when I do tapping, I see it as a stream of consciousness that is the
Mhm.
problem, the narrative that's around it, and there's layers to that. Yes,
Hmm.
I'm addicted to the chocolate chip cookie, but under here, what gets exposed, okay, is why I have to have this cookie. Does
Yeah.
that does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
And do
yeah,
you
so
I was gonna say, so then are you walking them through visions or regressing them
um,
back in their life a bit to have them
no, no,
okay.
it comes up how it they literally bring their food to my
Yeah.
office. Okay.
Yeah.
And like they may be sitting over here and the food is over there. And there's already a part of them that is wanting to take it in. So that's where we
Yeah.
start. Okay. Even
Wow.
though I really want that cookie. I
Yeah.
can taste it. It's so good, blah, blah, blah. We
Yeah.
just go around and around. And so if you think about it, here's that urge that is the
Mhm.
cue, right? As we enter into that experience of going for this food, so that we
Yeah.
have this kind of we hit that bliss point, okay, and then we're all happy, but then there's a
Yeah.
spiral. So what
Right.
I do in this work is we enter into here, and I expand that. So if like let's say that these little figures here are M&Ms, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm eating them. Okay, so it's like I refer to it as a swooping
Okay.
movement. So I just go grab it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but so I it and so we're totally unaware of what's happening in the body, like
Yeah.
salivation, like the
Mm.
eyes, getting bigger, the sense of smell and how it smells so good and what the stomach is doing. So all of those things, I expand it out. It's kind of like a slow motion experience, and I
Wow.
neutralize everything on the way. And then we finally get to the point where the food is like right here and they
Wow.
don't even want it. And but here's one thing that has happened repeatedly, and I don't know the answer to why. And
Okay.
maybe somebody that listens to this can tell me, but like particularly with sodas, um, this has happened every time 100%. They get to the point, okay, here's my water and the
Yeah.
soda's here, and they're repulsed by the smell. It doesn't feel like it's appetizing. They don't want it. And I said, well, you know, let's just take a sip just to make sure. So they take a sip. Okay, and I say, hold it in your mouth just for a couple of seconds and then you can swallow. Everyone across the board has to spit it out because it burns their mouth. The acid,
Wow.
the acid or some chemicals, they say it does not even taste the same. I
Wow.
mean, it is fascinating, and it has to be something with the chemicals in the drink, but I don't know exactly what that is because usually, I mean, when we're eat, eating and drinking, we're not paying attention. Like our
Right.
senses get numbed to it.
Right.
So the brain has an image and it has, those taste receptors that I don't know how much they interfere with what we're actually putting in our mouth because like people will bring in cakes and they can't eat them because they taste like chemical sludge.
Wow. Because that's what it
It's
is, probably in real life.
right. Yeah, I had
You
I
know,
had a
it's,
client who brought in a McDonald's burger, 'cause
oh, geez.
a double cheese. She ate one every day and she gained like 15 pounds in a couple years. And she saw the golden or well, she and went in. I
Yeah.
don't want to say that, but so I had her take a bite because we got to that point. She goes, "Ooh, I can't eat this." And she took a bite and she almost
Wow.
regurgitated because she said it tasted like chemical waste.
Wow.
She
No,
hadn't. Go
I,
ahead.
I'm I think what you're doing is actually so amazing on several levels. One is because health wise, right? These things aren't good for us. Two
Right.
is there's so much shame around people who feel like they have an addiction to something. Three, it usually has to do with a childhood wounding, which
Hmm.
is not often noticed or uncovered unless someone like you is talking to them. But why do you think, like the last thing I want to ask you is why do you think that your soul thinks it's important to work on food addiction or sugar addiction with people? Because it's clearly like you must be gifted at this. Like there must be something that you can in one session. Why do you think the soul or the spirit wants us to get over our food and sugar addictions?
Well, number one, share I share the experience of
Yeah.
I, I used every trick in the book to get that last like finger full of icing off of a cake. Um, and I I don't know. I started evaluating this when I moved to Florida. I was around 28, and this is like so ridiculous. but I started to do these self inquiries, right?
Mhm.
See who I was, because I didn't know who I was at this point. And I remember standing, obviously, I'm Italian, well, half Italian, half Sicilian. And I'm like, do I have to eat spaghetti on Sunday? I mean, because that was like a thing that we did every,
Mhm.
meat and spaghetti and salad and green beans, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't think I do. So I started becoming aware of like my food habits, and I changed my food habits dramatically because of my illness. I became macrobiotic for about 10
Mm.
years, which is a very limiting lifestyle, but it did heal my body. Um, I don't know. I've always, and it was because of that experience that I became really interested in health, body health, not only
Yeah.
in food, but how we take in life. And I
Yeah.
think food is like symbolic or kind of representative of that and how we interact with it and the quality of it. So
Yeah.
I think, I guess that's maybe why I never, that was a really good question. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I would think that if our soul needs to have a body to experience life, then it would want it to be in pretty good shape, and wouldn't want it to be
right,
constantly distracted from things that are not a part of its learning. And I think
right.
that in our day, definitely in America, we have everything you could possibly want, any kind of food that's processed, and go out to any dining experience, that to pull yourself away from that is extremely difficult because it's so well accepted. So I guess what I want to say is I think what you're doing is actually extremely important. And I think if more people knew that they could come to someone like you and literally get over
Hmm.
it without having to stress and strain and take drugs, and I mean, I think that is unbelievable gift that you're giving to the world. I mean that. It's
Thank you. It, wa-
everywhere. It's everywhere, you know.
it was a gift to me too, to
Yeah.
be able to free myself from
Yeah.
those clutches. And I guess you said it well, is that uh, I'll, I'll share this with you. Some years ago, I went to a silent retreat where I
Mm.
didn't talk for 4 days. And so on Sunday at lunch, and then we were to all meet, uh, to share our experiences. I was sitting having my lunch alone on this table, and there were two long tables in front of me, like rows of them, and there were about 10 or 12 people of different ages, like sitting in front of me. And I had this flash, this image of, I could see, like, here in the sacral area, like everybody had this kind of sunlight that reached out
Wow.
and connected to everybody and everything.
Wow.
But on top of it was, everybody had different levels of like like black burlap, and that obstructed their soul expression, their
Wow.
light, so to speak.
Yeah.
And and it was really fascinating. It was just a few seconds, but everybody's was so different, and I could see on their, how they were sitting and what they were doing, that kind of determined how much, like, I guess, baggage or
Yeah.
veils they had over them. But of course,
Wow.
I'm sitting there looking at myself, trying to see if I could see something. But that really kind of taught me about that, how connected we are as one, but yet we have this responsibility uh, to discover who we are. And these
Yeah.
obstacles are things that I like to push aside to allow
Yeah.
in my clients to flourish and to really connect
Yeah.
with the world in a beautiful way.
Yeah, because for whatever reason, our soul wants to discover ourselves in a body, so Thank you so much for being here and for staying a little bit longer than the half hour.
Well,
We got a little
thank you.
carried
It
away.
was a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
How can people find you? I know I found you on LinkedIn, but where else would you like people to look for you?
They can go to my website, which is my name, Sana Carpelati. I'm in Pittsburgh, and there's a contact page there. They can set up a complimentary Calendly call, a connection call, or send me an email. And I have a practice of same day connection uh,
Nice.
in response to people, unless it's quite late. But I'm happy to talk through, or if it's not for my work, somebody else, who would have a specialty that they might need.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking on this topic. Like I said, we haven't had that before. So thank you. And
Thank
I hope
you.
you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.